now would you like to call Mani? He's going to do a lecture tonight for us. So please, thank you.
So good evening,
Everyone.
Thanks for coming here in this day of celebration of Waitangi Day. For those who are on the internet, hello. In New Zealand, we are celebrating Waitangi Day, which celebrates the coming together of the local people, the Maori and the British that arrived here. It's a case of us celebrating us getting together, us here in New Zealand, with our friends in Brazil or anywhere in the world, through the technology, with the internet. Here we are. So welcome everybody in flesh, all those who are disincarnated, but also those who are in flesh, but somewhere else, in different part of the planet. Tonight we have our first lecture in English. We had a beautiful lecture last week in Portuguese, but tonight is the first Wednesday of the month, so we're going to do a lecture in English. And we're having a lecture which is called the Spiritist Codification, the basic books, the basic works of Allan Kardec, which is, by the way, the name of our group. So the first thing that we hear when we talk about the name of the group is Allan Kardec, Spiritist Group of New Zealand. So sometimes we forget to appreciate all the work that he has done in helping the superior spirits to bring us this blissful doctrine, this blissful, this blessing that we have of a way to behave, in a way to understand who we are, where we come from, what are we doing here, where are we going, which is basically, as human beings, are very essential questions for our development, to understand, have to understand where we come from, so we can have a better grasp of how to deal with our lives. So I'm going to go through the books and how much work and how much thought Allan Kardec put into bringing this codification for us. And before we go into the book themselves, it's good to have a look at who was Allan Kardec, which I believe most people here already know who he was, but it's always good to kind of revise in our mind this very intellectual, very smart and very intelligent professor from France. His real name was Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail, and he was born in Lyon in France on the 3rd of October 1804. He was a son of Antoine Rivail and Jean-Louis Duhamel, and from very early age he was a very advanced student. He would be helping his colleagues in school to go through their homework and even give him himself lessons. He was a tutor for his fellow students, so he showed signs of ability in teaching when he was and he became a disciple and collaborator of Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi, which was one instructor and teacher that kind of developed a very interesting way of teaching in Switzerland. So he was French, but he studied in Switzerland. He was a teacher of mathematics, physics, chemistry, astronomy, physiology, comparative anatomy, and French in Paris. So his knowledge was broad. He wasn't just a teacher of one subject. He mastered many different subjects, and his work as Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail was actually used by the educational system in France as well. So he has already known as an author, being Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail. And he was very interested as well in the theories of Mesmer, which was using magnetism for healing and for therapies as well. So he became interested more into spiritualism through that vein, because as we said, he was interested in physics, chemistry, and astronomy. So he became aware of mesmerism, which is the studies of Mesmer became later applied onto the use of magnetism for healing or for therapy that we normally use as a pass or a spiritual treatment these days. So he became interested in that, and he was invited to see some of these spiritual phenomena that they have been happening since some mediumnic phenomena that happened in the United States, also in Europe, where the spirits started to communicate more frequently in a way they had never seen before. And it was a kind of a fashion at that time where people used to go to parties to see this phenomena happening, which was the more of a physical phenomena with the raps, with the knocks, where they could hear some noises coming from tables. And tables would not only make noises, but also levitate and give intelligent answers. Some mediums were contacting the spirits by a very primitive way of communicating with the spirits via this phenomena, this physical phenomena that happened, which is, Spiritism explains, that is just a different type of mediumship that happens, but very physical still. And that happened in 1855. So for the first time, he can see, he presents for the first time the psychic phenomena, and he can't understand that because he's a very logical man. He can't understand how a table can give an intelligent answer. A table doesn't have a brain, doesn't have a person behind it. So he started to study, but very skeptical about it. He didn't believe straight away. He wanted to prove that there was a fraudulent phenomenon. He didn't believe that it was real. He believed there was something else going on. So he actually wanted to prove that his activities were fake news, fake turning tables. So he decided to study, but then he realized, after the development of this very primitive phenomena, which first happened as which people called spiritual telegraphy, like a telegram, which we don't use anymore, but back in the days to send like a Morse code, as one knock is, or one signal is A, two signals is B. So they started to develop this kind of communication with the spirit, like spiritual telegraphy. And they started to develop different ways of communicating with the basket, using a basket where a medium would approach the basket and hold the basket. The spirits would communicate like that with the pen, in the handle, and the pen would write a message. But of course, as we know, automatic writing started to happen as well. And then he started to get more and more interesting and more in-depth ideas of what the spirits were trying to explain to him. And then he realized that there was something much more serious than simple entertainment, because people at the time, for them, was a party trick. People were there just to see what was going on, to be entertained. But because he was of a serious nature and a very intellectual person, he wanted to study more deeply. And he came across these messages, and because he had a scientific background, he started to study and compare them to see what messages were correct and what messages were of a more joking. Because as we know, the spirits are just like us. As we have in a society, in our lives, we can see people that just like to make fun. Some people are more serious. Some people, have deep conversations. So just like that, the spirits are. So sometimes a communication would come from the spiritual world where it would not be with agreement with the majority of them. So he went through a very deep study from 1855 to 1857, so 2 years, collecting different messages, from not only from the same mediums but from many mediums. Because a misconception, a lot of people think that Allan Kardec wrote the codification, wrote the Spirit's book. He was only, as we call him in Portuguese, o codificador, the codifier, which in English would be more like an organizer. He organized the answers. Of course, he had a certain communication with the spirits. He had a nature of feeling this connection with the spiritual world. He wouldn't be otherwise. But he was not directly a medium that wrote the books. So he used many different mediums from many different centers, but mainly two young ladies, the name of Caroline and Julie Baudin, and also Miss Jaffet, and other mediums as well. So as I was saying, he gathered answers from many spirits regarding their origin, because he was curious. So if you were a spirit, Where do you come from? Also, the faith and the relationship that these spirits had with the material world. And then he compiled them very methodologically, because being a teacher, he was able to put them in a way that would be easy for others to understand. And based on his work as a teacher, the result is the first book that we have, which is the Spirit's book. The book that we, by the way, study here every Wednesday, apart from the first Wednesday of the month. We study the Spirit's book in a part of a group study where we study the questions and answers, and then together we have a more not informal but more participation from the crowd as well, not just lectures. So everybody's welcome to come here every Wednesday so we can study in depth this book. So Hippolyte Léon Denis Arquivaille, his real name, was already a household name from the scientific and teaching background. So he signs the book as Allan Kardec. He decided to use his a pen name as a different name so people wouldn't get confused, because he already had some books as his real name. And the name Allan Kardec came from inspiration from his spiritual guide, saying there was a previous reincarnation. His name was Allan Kardec, so he continued using this name as Allan Kardec. And that's why our group is called Allan Kardec, Spiritist Group of New Zealand, because he was the person who organized and, like in a catalog, put all these questions together to publish the first book of the codification, the first book out of the 5 books that are the base of what we study. The nature and the origin and the communication between the spiritual world and the material world. And this book was published first in 18th of April, 1857. So we are celebrating 162 years this year in a few months. And the basically it shows the principles of Spiritism on the immortality of the soul, the nature of the spirits, and their relationship with men. So the spirits with the incarnated spirits, that living here, the moral laws, the laws that are the divine laws that we must follow in order to become better spirits, based on the Christian moral, the present life, the future life, and the future of humanity. And now it consists of 1,019 questions. The first edition had only 501 questions. First time that we published in 1857. But in the second edition, he decided to break them down to further explain a little bit more. And the current edition, which was from the second edition, has 1,019 questions. And it divided into a few parts. An introduction, prolegomena, in Portuguese, prolegómenos, which is another word to say like a prologue, which is a second kind of introduction. And then there's the body of work itself. It's divided in 4 parts. Part 1, the primary causes. Part 2, the world of the spirits, of the spiritual world. Part 3, the moral laws. And Part 4, hopes and consolations. And also these parts are also called books. Book 1, Book 2, Book 3, Book 4. All within the same book. And then we have the conclusion. And he was so clever and so smart about it that this is the base for all the codification. All the books that followed after the publishing of this book, they are based on this body of work, and also the introduction in prolegomena. Because what happened was, after releasing this book, which by the way was published in France, but it was burnt in Spain. The Spanish church did not accept this, and they believed it was a sacrilege. So a lot of the books, of Spirit's book, they were burned in the square in Spain because they said that was not part of the Christianity. So we can only imagine that there was a big spiritual assistance in the selection of which country this book should be written first, which was France. France being a country that had just been going through the French Revolution, looking for equality, fraternity. So they were more open to new ideas. And France, which was a Catholic country, accepted, but the neighbor country, it was not accepted. It was It was burned on public square by the local bishop. So, because as we know, the Spiritism is the third revelation from God. The first one being Moses in the Ten Commandments, the second one being Jesus, which he himself announced just before he was taken for the Via Crucis. He announced to his disciples that he was going to go back and to be with the Father, but he would send another comforter, another consoler, o Consolador Prometido, which is the Spiritism. So we know that there is a big support from the spiritual side to bring this divine truth to us. So it was like a calculated invasion of good vibes and good message. The good news had finally arrived on earth. So there was all a preparation for these new ideas of the divine law to come from France instead of other countries, and then move from France to Brazil, because we know that Brazil is the most Spiritist country in the world. There's a whole new lecture about this. Brasil, coração do mundo, padre evangelho, which was actually another thing by Karen. I think Karen did a beautiful lecture about that, which should be in our website as well. So this book, there is an agreement of principles on the works of the Spiritist Codification within this group. So just breaking down once more this body of work and how Allan Kardec very cleverly separated and divided this book, we can see here. Can you guys read this a little bit?
Yeah.
So, going back to the question that I asked, that Spiritism gives us an answer to a few questions. Who am I? Who are we? Where do we come from? And where do we go? Okay? So, in the introduction, in the prolegomena, or the prologue, they arrive through two other books that Allan Kardec published between the Spirit's book and the Medium's book, which is the second book that we're going to see very shortly. So he also made a little booklet just with the very basic ideas of what is Spiritism. Oops, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Spiritism easily explained. What is Spiritism in other Spiritist books? So out of this message, he created introduction and prolegomena. So he used that information to create these other books. So in the first part of the Spirit's book, we talk about the primary causes, talking about God, who is God, our nature as spirits, the formation of spirits, and formation of the planet Earth, formation of the universe. So pretty much is the primary causes. What has caused everything? As we know, the answer to that is God. God is the supreme intelligence, the primary cause of all things. So we spent a bit of time on that. And a lot of information that was in here is the basis for another book, which is the Genesis, which is the last book of the codification. As the name suggests, Genesis talks about the creation of the universe, of the spiritus, of the principio inteligente, the intelligent principle, and the matter. So it's a very dense book. It's a book that a lot of people fear in the Spiritist group, but it's very important to understand where we come from, because these primary causes in Genesis explain to us who we are. That we are spiritual beings that are having a human experience. In other way, not the other way around. We're not humans that have spiritual experiences. We are immortal, spiritual beings that are living on this planet. And we had a creation, we had a creator. And then on the second book, the Spirits explain a little bit more about their life, the life of the Spirit book, the Spirit world, which then we see that is also the life that we come from. As we said before, we are spirits that are incarnated here. And all the process of the incarnation, how we incarnate, the emancipation of the soul, what happens when we sleep, where do our soul go, and after the disincarnation as well, the reincarnation, everything, this communication between, not communication, but this interchange of life between spiritual life, the real life, and the incarnated life, which is the temporary life, is explained on this part here, the second book, the Spirit World, which explains a little bit where we come from. A little bit of these answers we get from the primary causes, but also from the second book, which talks about the spirit world. And the second book, the second part, it gives us the base for the medium's book, which we're going to see next. So as you can see, he divided the Spirit's book in a way that opens up possibilities and opens up the basic for understanding what was to come, as an intuition of what was about to come, in a way that could be easy to understand. Then the third book, which is the base for the gospel according to Spiritism, is about the moral laws, which we're going to see them all broken down again. So there's a lot of, I know it's a lot of information, but we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it. We're going to get to the very little details. So the moral laws, which is basically the moral of Jesus Christ, applied on our daily lives, applied in a more current and more modern society that we live these days, apart from just having the maxim that Jesus left us, which is to love God above all, with all your heart, with all your knowledge, with all your soul, and love your brothers as love your neighbor as yourself. So these moral laws, they break them down into more specific ideas of how to react with God and react with our human beings. And that's pretty much the base for the gospel according to Spiritism. The fourth book, Hopes and Consolation, with the fourth part of the Spirit's book, talking about the hopes and consolations, and basically talking about the hope that we must have for the present life. Why do we suffer? Why do people suffer on planet Earth? And what's the consolation for the future? What can we look after for the future? And this is the base for the heaven and hell. The ideas that what does heaven mean to the Spirit's doctrine, what the hell mean for the Spirit doctrines, and comparing with other thoughts as well, other philosophies of thought and other religions as well, we can find in this fourth book of the Codification. And we also have the conclusion. So with all the information that he gives us, we get a feeling for answers for this question. What do I feel? What do I feel as a spirit incarnated now? And also, why do I suffer? Why there's so much suffering in this planet? If God is just, loving, and wise, why do we suffer? Why do we have to go through suffering? And also, based on the third book, the Moral Laws, we have a question: how to be a Spiritist? How to behave to be a Spiritist? And why to be a Spiritist? What comes on the conclusion as well. So as we can see, there's a lot of things that we can take from just one book. One book was the seed that was planted for the development of more in-depth ideas. So that's why it's important that we study this every Wednesday that we are here. So we get the idea and get the knowledge of all of this basic information that we can use to further develop our studies into Spiritism. So this was in 1857. In 1861, he publishes the second book, which is the Medium's book. In January 1861, which is, the name explains, a guide for mediums and evocations. Spirit's theory of all kinds of manifestations, the means of communication with the invisible world, the development of mediumship, the difficulties and setbacks that can be found in the practice of Spiritism or practice of mediumship. And it's divided in two parts: preliminary notions, there's 4 chapters, and spiritual manifestations, 32 chapters. So basically, because Spiritism was born from the mediunic exploration, he went to study these mediunic manifestations. So a very important part of Spiritism is the practice of mediumship. And even after all these years, the Medium's book is one of the safest guidelines for any deep and serious study of mediumship, because he gives us not only the theory or the preliminary notions, but also give us a lot of examples of different spiritual manifestations. And most importantly, warn us of the difficulties and setbacks that can be found in practice of mediumship. Because as we know, mediumship is not exclusivity of Spiritism. There are many other religions, there are many other sects, there are many other people that practice mediumship. But with mediumship that is being explained by the superior spirits through Allan Kardec, we have a really strong foundation on the development of the mediumship and understanding as well. So this book, as I said, is divided in 2 parts. And basically on the second part of the Spirit's book. So in this part of the Spirit's book, it shows us that there are the spirits that interact with this passage between the material world and the spiritual world. Spirits live either in the material or the spiritual world. They pass from the spiritual plane to the material one through birth. The passage from the material plane to the spiritual one happens through death. So that already gives us a comfort that life goes on. And this mystifies a little bit about the communication of mediumship, because a lot of people think, oh, the mediumship is something that is extraordinary. But as you can see, the spirits are just like us. They are just living on a different dimension, on a different reality, that the reality that we come from as well. And also, this mystifies death, the fear of death, because we know that it's just a simple process of coming and going, like a train station. Some people come on a train and leave the train. Other people board the train. So basically, this life is like a train station or an airport, because not many people use this train anymore, but like an airport. People flying away, people landing, people taking off. So there is constant interaction between spirits in the material and spiritual worlds. And this interaction also happens not only when we were born, when we disincarnate, but also it happens through the communication between the spiritual and the material world. So this second part of the Spirit's book, we have a few chapters that explain the spirits, the incarnation, the return to the spirit life, plurality of existences, so more reincarnation, additional consideration, talks about the spirit life, about the spiritual reality can be in a lovely colony where we're going to learn, we're going to develop more. It could be a reality that is not so happy, it could be a little bit more primitive if we have a few mistakes and have a few reparations of consequences of mistakes that we made. So that explains in the spirit life chapter. The return to the corporeal life, the old explanation about reincarnation, the emancipation of the soul, about dreams, about how our perispirit can emancipate and travel different distances, the intervention of spirits in the corporeal world, how the spirits can intervene in our life if we are not very careful, how they can influence us in our daily life, occupation and mission of the spirits, and also the 3 kingdoms, the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, and also the animal kingdom. So, and then Allan Kardec had to wait another 3 years and to publish this 3rd book, which is the Gospel According to Spiritism, which is another book that we study here. For those who don't know, our study groups here, we have like an inspirational reading, we have initial prayer, and then we study this book, the Gospel According to Spiritism. And then we do comments. And then the 2nd book is the Spirit's book, and then we finalize with the spiritual treatment and the final prayer. But the Gospels, not this Gospel according to Spiritism, but the New Testament, the Gospel, they can be divided into 5 parts. The Gospel that most religions, most Christian religions follow. They have the ordinary acts of life of Christ, how Christ was living back in the day. Talk about the miracles as well. The predictions, especially about the apocalypse and the things that can happen in the future. And the words that have been taken by other religions to become the dogma or to become the part of the physical practice of the Christianity, and also, lastly, there are the moral teaching, the teaching that Jesus gave us to give us a lesson about our morality as human beings. So, the first four, the acts of life, the miracles, predictions, and the words that have been taken to create this external way of worshipping or creating dogmas, they are very, they are a base of a lot of, not confusion, but discordance. Some religions think it's that way, some religions think it should be this way, some religions think it should be that way, but in one thing they agree: the moral teaching of Jesus Christ, which is the biggest example that he gave, the biggest commandment of them all, which he said that is love God above all and your neighbor as yourself. Most religions have that as a base to be a better person, to be a better Spiritist, to be a better Catholic, to be a better Protestant. So it's something that we all agree with, right? So this is what is on the gospel according to Spiritism. If you look at the New Testament, is in most of the, actually they are all translations, but they're all in chronological order. They follow the life of Jesus Christ from pretty much his teachings until his crucifixion. But Allan Kardec and Superior Spirits decided to do differently. It's not in chronological order, because in this book, which funnily enough, the first title was Imitation of the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is a little bit misleading because it's not an imitation. It is a gospel according to Spiritism. So he changed after the second edition, came up with a new name, just the gospel according to Spiritism. So basically, it's that it's taking some ideas, some maxims of Jesus Christ, and explained with a new insight, with new information that the Spirits gave us of where we come from, what are we doing here, and where are we going, and how we can apply these teachings of Jesus to achieve our mission. Because he said himself that he is the pathway, the way, and the life. So the only way we can be better spirits is by following Jesus Christ's teachings. So this is divided as an index of biblical references. There's a preface, it summarizes the time, the character of Spiritism, the purpose of this book. So that's all in the first part of the book. And the introduction contains 4 items, and the body of work, 28 chapters. So basically, it's the moral teachings of Christ taken from the Bible and explained according to the Spiritist principles. Because as a third revelation of God, it gives new information, gives a new perspective on what Jesus said. And give us the opportunity to better understand the moral laws, the divine laws that we must follow to be able to understand our better connection between ourselves and the Creator, and also ourselves and our fellow creatures, our neighbors, as Jesus put, our brothers and sisters. So this is the third part of the Spirit's book, the base for the Gospel according to Spiritism. So we can see that all these laws, they are meant to create a connection and a better understanding between God, understand ourselves, and our responsibility with God and also with others, with our brothers and sisters. We can see also, note that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10. Just like the 10 Commandments. Because what happened was Jesus gave us the teachings of the law. Basically, what Jesus gave us was the law of justice, love, and charity, which is the main law that all the other laws branch out. Like he said, all the teachings of the gospel and the teachings of the prophets can be summarized by this law. So everything else follows this law. And as the Spirits say, we as human beings, we can't just have, okay, go and love we need more specific information on how to achieve things. Because love, as we know, we are in a planet that is on a level, semi-primitive level, a planet of trials and expiations. We have human beings that will fully have a better understanding of love. Not fully, because as we know, there's more evil than good on this planet. They have a better understanding of the law of love, and others that won't. So that's what these moral laws give us, a better guidance. So we have the law of adoration, how to worship God through prayer, but also through our daily lives as well, worshiping God as everything that we do. The law of labor, that everything in nature works. Everything has to work, and we all have to labor. We are not here on holidays. We are on this planet to work and to make ourselves better spirits. The law of reproduction, the law of destruction, the law of preservation, the law of society, the law of progress, law of equality, law of liberty or freedom, and also finally the law of justice, love, and charity. So this is the base for the gospel according to Spiritism, using the maxims of Jesus Christ to exemplify how to better understand these laws and how to follow these laws. So once again, we see the third part of the Spirit's book being the base for another book. So how clever was Allan Kardec to put this together? Of course, with the inspiration from the superior spirits. He wasn't chosen just because by chance. He's been prepared to do this job, and he accomplished his mission very wisely. So the fourth book is Heaven and Hell. So there was not much time between the Medium's book and the Heaven and Hell, because he kept working. Allan Kardec kept working between the books. See, of course, they had their meetings in the Parisian Spiritist Society, but also every month of all these years that he was alive, he would publish the Spirit Review, the Spiritist magazine. So for 10 years, there's 12 issues, so there's 120 magazines that he also published. So as he kept going, things became easier in a way to publish new books. So in August 1865, so we pretty much explained the divine justice according to Spiritism. If God is just, is there really a heaven? That the archangels will be playing their harp and all the angels will be sitting on the clouds and playing the flutes? Is there really a hell that spirits are condemned to burn in their fire for eternity? So we understand, with a better understanding of Spiritism, with the base from the Spirit's book, we can understand that they are just concepts and ideas of hopes or joy and sorrow, happiness and unhappiness, heaven and hell. So pretty much it's an examination and comparison of the doctrines about the passage from the physical life to the spiritual life, the future penalties and rewards, angels and demons and sufferings. So pretty much the consequences, talks about the consequences of our lives on this planet. What will happen after we die? And this is divided in two parts. The first part is titled Doctrine. It's 11 chapters. So in this part, it compares. So what do this part of this religion think about? What about this concept? And compares with what Spiritism believes as well, and proposes. And the second part is just examples. So there you can go, you can see the example of a communication from a spirit that was in a very unhappy situation in life. Somebody that committed suicide, for example. What is their reality in the spiritual world? Somebody that was greedy. How do they suffer these consequences of this greed? Somebody that was in a normal or average. What happens to them? Somebody that was a good person, and then compares them. How he was from a scientific background, so he was always comparing these messages from unhappy to average to spirits that excelled and accomplished their mission on this life. So the title of the book clearly indicates its purpose. gather all the elements to clarify man about his fate. So we have a better idea. Okay, so I better try to follow these moral laws so I don't face this reality. Because it is reality. It is our spiritual life, but it is reality. And when we disincarnate, we will see that. But we can foresee, we can see in advance by this experience of others. Because there are many ways of learning. One way of learning is to go through ourselves, which I'm sure all of us have learned by our mistakes. But we can also learn by the mistakes of others and try to apply them into our lives. So this heaven and hell give us a good example or exploration of what could happen or what will happen after we pass away, after we disincarnate. So this is what the fourth part of the Spirit's book gives us. Hopes and consolations. So pretty much the consequences of the fulfillment or not of the divine laws. If we fulfill, we try to be loving brothers and sisters. If we try to follow the doctrine of Jesus Christ, because remember that Allan Kardec said we don't have to be perfect. To be a spirit, to be a true spiritist, it doesn't mean to be perfect. It means that you do all your effort to work on your internal change, your inner reform, how we can reform ourselves to become better. Every day be better than what we were yesterday. So if we try our best with all our heart, with all our mind, with all our body to fulfill these laws, we are taking a step towards a better life from the spiritual world. So it explains that the spirits can go interchange from material world to the spiritual world. And the first chapter talk about the earthly joys and sorrows. So why do we live here on this planet where we have people that are so happy, they have it all, and some people that are so miserable, they have nothing? Why is this difference? Understanding where we come from, we didn't start fresh in this reincarnation. We have a baggage. We have a spiritual baggage. So every joy or every sorrow that happens in this earthly life, we have a past that we don't remember. Thank God, we don't remember. How ashamed we will be of facing our own weaknesses. So we have an idea, we have an inclination of what we are, or what we've done. But this knowledge about this past life in communication between material and spiritual world gives us explanation why we suffer, why there is suffering in this world, but also give us hopes for the future. Because depending on what we do today, we will have a better future. We're either going to have joy or we're going to continue to have sorrow. It only depends on us. Because God has given us the power to choose. We have our free will. We learn from the second part of the book that we were born, we were created simple and ignorant, but with the perfectibility. We are not perfect, but we have perfectibility. We have the ability to become perfect, which is our goal. And to that, God gave us our free will, our power to choose what we do, but also the responsibility of putting up with the consequences that we have to face. It can either be joy, or can either be sorrow. But once again, remembering that this sorrow is not eternal. We are eternal. But this sorrow will happen as long as we continue to do the same things, to do the same actions, expecting a different consequence. So the idea of an eternal hell or of eternal sorrow, as we can see, is negated is denied by Spiritism. So then we come to the last book, which is very, like I said, very dense. A lot of people fear the Genesis, I think it's very important to read it and try to read it and try to study it, because it's not just a read, it's actually a study. Because as the name, not the name, but the tagline says, it explains the miracles and predictions according to Spiritism. So is divided in 3 parts. He studied 3 points: the Genesis, which is the creation, the beginning of it all, the beginning of the universe, the beginning of planet Earth, the beginning of the spirits, the beginning of matter. All explained from chapter 1 to chapter 12. From chapter 13 to 15, explain about the miracles. That miracles are nothing more than spiritual phenomena that happen that we cannot understand yet. Miracles happen every day, but it's not something that is out of the ordinary. It's something that can be explained. Some of them cannot be explained yet, but a lot of the miracles that we saw in the Old Testament, they can be a little bit more explained in a more rational way. So it takes away explaining through science a little bit about the miracles, and also the predictions from chapter 17 to 16 to 18. And as the Spirits of St. Louis in posthumous works, which is another book that was published after the death of Allan Kardec, Obras posthumous works. The Spirits of St. Louis talking about the Genesis. So this work comes incidentally in the sense that the doctrine is now well established in terms of moral and religious. So all these basic works up to the Genesis were more based on moral and religion and philosophy in a way. Spiritism is currently entering a new phase. After the publishing of the Genesis, enter a new phase. The attribute of a comforter combines with those with an instructor and director of the Spirit in science and philosophy as in morality. So basically, he's reconfirming what the Spirits have said. The objective of Spiritism is to instruct and to comfort. Instruir e consolar. Because when you are instructed, when you learn about our spiritual reality, where do we come from? What am I doing here? Where am I going? Why do we suffer? We understand that you suffer less. You better understand why the suffering is happening, and most importantly, you understand that the suffering is temporary. There was a lecture from Rádio Boa Nova in Osasco, in Guarulhos, in São Paulo. I forgot his name. I'm sorry if you're listening. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. He's saying that once we understand Spiritism, we should cross the word problem in our life, because for every problem there is a solution. Maybe it won't be next week, maybe it won't be next month, maybe it won't be next year, maybe it won't be this life, but because we are eternal spirits, there will be a solution for any problem. And with any problem, if there is a solution, you're going to learn from it. So a problem, there is a lesson, and in every lesson there is a blessing, because from this lesson will make you a better spirit, which is very hard to put in our daily life when we are going through our daily life. But when we are instructed and we understand and we try to understand, try to put them into practice in our daily lives, this instruction comforts us. My suffering is temporary, it's not going to go forever. It is happening for a reason, which is unknown to me right now. But I trust in God, I trust in Jesus, that this is happening for a reason, and I will be a better spirit after this. It takes a lot of faith, but it's a faith that is not blind. It's a faith that is rational. That's why all these books are here for our understanding, for our study, which is not easy. Sometimes it's easy to be on Facebook, or easy to be on social media, or watching Netflix, but it's important to take some time of our week or even our day to read a small passage to further develop this, because all of this is in our conscience. When God created us, He put all this information in our conscience, but for it to become our wisdom, to become our knowledge, we need to reinforce it. It's like a little seed in our garden. We have to keep putting water, we have to keep putting fertilizer, we have to keep taking away the weeds of our bad inclination. We have to look after this information that is in our consciousness, our conscience, so we can bring it to our daily lives, into our reality. So basically, everything that is in the Genesis comes from the first part of the Spirit's book, which is the first causes. Very important information that we have to keep in our minds to understand. God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. God created two universal elements, the spirit and matter. The spirit is the intelligent principle of the universe, which is us. We are intelligent principle, which is always developing. We're always going to be learning. Matter is an instrument the spirit uses and upon which the spirit acts. Creation is the result of the spirit action upon matter according to divine law. So this is very important for us to accept the position that we are in as very humble spirits in a long journey of self-development and spiritual growth. So basically these are the first 5 books of the codification, but Allan Kardec didn't stop there, because after he passed away, the Parisian Society of Spiritist Studies, with the help of his wife, published the posthumous work, which basically is an instruction on how to create spirit centers. Everything is there. How we should create and how a spiritist group or spiritist center should function within society. All the different works that we do here, pretty much everything comes from the works on the posthumous work. And also, Allan Kardec founded and presided the Spiritist magazine from 1858 until he passed away in 1869. And all this Spiritist magazine is available. If you go to Federação Espírita Brasileira website, you can download on PDF. And if you're interested to go to further study, go animals. And then it goes, everything that talks about animals will be there on the spiritual. You can go to June of 1859, and they'll be there. You can study a bit about that. You go obsession. You can find a lot of topics there that further increases and creates a further depth of understanding of the codification. So if we are wondering, where else can I study Spiritism? There's a whole lot of things that Allan Kardec left us to study. So Emmanuel also concluded that we can say that the principles codified by Allan Kardec open a new era for the human spirit, compelling us to listen to ourselves and the adjustments to the path traced by Jesus towards the true progress of the soul, and explain that Spiritism, therefore, is the disciplinarian of our freedom. I think it's very powerful when he says, he's the disciplinary of our freedom. What is that? Disciplinary of our freedom. Because as I say, we have a freedom. We have the power to choose what to do in our life. But having the understanding of the Spiritism, our freedom is more, we have discipline, which were the 3 requirements that Emmanuel told Chico Xavier. Do you really want to follow this path of doing this job of writing all these books? Yes, I do. So what do I need? You need 3 things: discipline, discipline, and discipline. So what Emmanuel is reminding us again is that following these instructions, we can discipline our freedom. We can choose better. We can choose more wisely. Not just for us to have a dignified social life on earth, but also so that we have an individual, harmonious life in the field of the spiritual plane. Because as we know, not just to live happily here, but we can have a better and a happier spirit life, future life. Duly adjusted to impositions of the perfect universal life, depending on the rules of eternal justice, supreme balance, prepared by the laws of God. Action and Reaction, introduction by Emmanuel Francisco Xavier. So, it was not, I mean, today was not very much of a lecture per se, it was more of a study, right? Of a study and acknowledgement of the importance of the codification and how meticulous the spiritual world, the superior spirits, and Allan Kardec prepared all these tools, all these guidelines, all these maps, whatever name you want to use, all these instructions for us to study, to learn, and most important, to put into practice. So we can only be grateful to come across this doctrine and be grateful that the spirits are giving us all this map, or more technological and current, the GPS. GPS, how to be a better person. Do this, avoid this path, go this path. You know, we have the recipe. We can only need to put it together and put it in the oven to make this beautiful cake. We have the recipe, we have the GPS, we have the map, we have everything we need. We only need to use our freedom wisely, and we only need the courage. Because we have support, we have the Spirit Codification, the books. We also have, by learning through the codification, we have support from our spiritual friends. We have one spirit that God gave us in the second part of the Spirit's book. We can see that God has given us a spiritual friend, a spiritual guide, a spiritual brother or sister to help us. We just need to pray, to be in connection with them, and we'll be guided. But the work, we must do the work. The spirits can take us to the door, but we have to open the door and we have to walk through it. And so it all depends on us. And we have we have a lot of excuses, but we have a lot of reasons not why to go into depth into this study, because it will help us to go forward and to move to a better field of reality in our spiritual plane. So this is pretty much what I prepared for us this evening. If you have any questions, any comments, anything else to say, we have a few minutes. It's still 8:15.
Yeah, it's interesting when you said about the communication, the medium's book, because there is other religions or that talks about mediumship, or the connection or the conversation, communication, better saying, with the spiritual world. And we know that the Spiritism is actually a science, right? The science of the soul. That's why we got everything explained on the medium's book, for example, that shows us what we have to do in order to have the communication, right? So they will learn, they will use the mediumship, but they still, more or less, they will need this guide when they want to use in a proper way, to say, right?
Yeah, it's a more of a safe way, because it's taken away from any mysticism. That's pretty much what I think the word I would say. A lot of the spiritual communication and the mediumship is surrounded by mysticism, and people do things because that's the way it's being done, but they don't understand why. In Spiritism, because in this medium's book is divided in two. The first one is theory, and the second one is a practice. So we have a guide that make us understand what's happening, and not just by doing it because of the sake of the ability that we can do it. We're doing a medium phenomena, or a medium development, or the practice of mediumship, but with a very solid understanding of why it happens, how it happens, what will be the consequences. So that gives us a stronger foundation of doing it, just because of mysticism, but also doing because of understanding of the importance of the work, the importance of helping the spirits in the spiritual world as well, so we can help the spirits that are here incarnated. because as we can see, there's a lot of intervention between the spiritual world and the physical world. So by helping the spiritual friends, we also helping the people that are incarnated. So that's the importance of the spiritual, the manifestations of mediumship, and understanding of this foundation, theory foundation.
Thank you. Another question?
Sure.
Does the 5 books or the 5 books of codification, do they limit all the knowledge about Spiritism, or they are just kind of the beginning of it?
Well, it is the base, and Allan Kardec himself said that, and the Spiritists themselves said that Spiritism is a progressive science. So, and he said if there was something that comes from science that proves us wrong, then take that and put science instead, because he understands that the science and Spiritism goes together. And up to this day, there's nothing that's been said in Spiritism that's been proved to be incorrect by science. By the contrary, now we have studies that say that the spiritual treatment of the past is beneficial. You know, and there's many studies in USP, Unicamp, that prove that. The quantum physics already talking about quantum entanglement, how when two people come together, they are forever connected. And so there's a lot of things that are happening, a lot of Spiritist scientists and Spiritist doctors that are using science to further develop the understanding of the spiritual world as well. So we only have to gain by the development of intelligence and development of human understanding in the physical world to further explain the spiritual world as well. So it's just is the base of the knowledge that it will be coming from now on as well.
Who were the first readers of his books? Like, were they teachers, students?
Who were the first
readers?
I think it was more the intellectual part of the Spiritist societies, because unlike the first medium phenomena that was happening, that was just part of entertainment. People would be drinking and then joking and seeing the tables levitate. And when things became more serious, all the people that were more interested in entertainment, they left and became more of a serious study. And they kept going. They're still going actually in France. This Parisian Society of Spiritist Studies, which was the first Spiritist group in the world. So it was more, I think, it was more from the intellectual part of society that kept studying, and people that were interested in that kind of phenomena, because we can see, like, even the studies of Allan Kardec were pretty much used. Not studies of Allan Kardec, but the works of Allan Kardec was used to further studies of Charles Richer, Gabriel Delany, and other very intellectual people of the European society at that time. So, because you have to remember that back then, it was still a lot of the truth of the divine truth was a bit hidden from a lot of masses were still being studied in Latin, so there was not very available for the society of the time. And Spiritists, or the books of Spiritism, they've been translated to many other languages. The original is in French, but you can find in many different languages, so it's available to from the very beginning, because with the beginning of Spiritism, a book already arrived in Brazil, and that the little scene was already sent to Brazil, was translated from French to Portuguese, and then grew a lot in Brazil as well. So I think it was more of an intellectual part of the society in France back in the days. Well, all these books, I mean, most of these books we have in our library. We have a lot in Portuguese, but some are still basically in English, but we are about to order some more. They are available for downloading on the Federação Espírita Brasileira if you have a tablet or computer. So we can, and we are here every Wednesday from 7 to 9 o'clock, so we're waiting here. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.